Hello and welcome to another Tuesday Talkie on the Bearfoot Miniatures channel. Today we're going to be going over something that I've been looking forward to for a bit, because who doesn't like playing completely basic humans in a fantasy setting and seeing if your Landsknecht can batter an orc around the head? It's the Empire of Man army list. So the Empire of Man, as a brief summary to their operation in general, you've got basic human stat line. Who knew? Threes across the board generally, unless you have something like veterancy in your troops. They're not going to excel in any particular area, but what they can do is cover their weaknesses by having a broad spectrum of units. Their knights may not be the best knights in the old world, but they're better than some other armies' knights. Their foot troops may not be the best foot troops in the old world, but they're better than some. And the benefits of the Empire is working out what part of your army is better than the opponent's army and leveraging that to grind out a victory. Now, that is something that across game systems, actually, I don't think being a generalist tends to put you in the best position. I do think, as like a power level wise, it's something that you want a clear focus to aim for, and it makes an army easier to play. Is just like, I'm just gonna be stronger in this one aspect than the other person, and I just have to focus on that. So I don't think it leaves them in the greatest ever position. And this is one that I've been looking forward to because I really like the Empire. I've got some Empire troops up there that I'm currently working on to get onto the channel. But I don't think they're in the strongest position at the moment. Does that mean that you can't get a win with them or successfully use them? There's been a couple of tournaments now where they've had like moderately successful Empire lists. So I think it can be done, and I don't think the power levels, whenever we go through things like this, I don't think it's like a 0-100 difference in power level. I think we're sort of with the power levels arguing over maybe like 60% to 80% or 65 to 75, whatever number you want to put on it, is a much closer difference, even when we're like, oh, this one character's crap, this other character's brilliant. So yeah, it's they're not in the most easily strong position, but if you learn your army inside out, and I think this is one thing that Empire benefits from the most armies, that if you learn your army inside out, the sum of the parts eventually leads to a greater whole, and working out how that actually operates. So I think first couple of games you might not do as well as you'd expect, and then getting into it a bit more, you will start learning the army. And I think that actually will catch up as the old world matures. Empire might start doing better as people work out how to leverage units in different positions, because one of the things is there's no chariots for chariot spam to spam close order, which is currently a list floating about. So how does Empire get close order into the list more, or how to utilize the regimental and detachment units, which is potentially a very strong mechanics, which even with dwarfs we don't really see them use their detachments in the form of iron drakes. Empire, I think you're much more wanting to going to be leaning into that. But yeah, that's the Empire general review. I think let's get on into the actual list, because I could waffle on for quite a while about this. So as per, we're going to do the Commander of the Empire first to give some context to the magic items that we're going to look at. We'll then do the rest of the characters, the units, knights and war machines. So the Commander of the Empire, 90 points, that puts you about the level of an aspiring champion of chaos for your Lord level Commander of the Empire. You've got Weapon Skill, Ballistic Skill 5, Strength Toughness 4, 3 wounds, Initiative 5, 3 attacks, Leadership 9. So you've got relatively high leadership. Obviously, it's dwarf leadership for the army, but say Chaos, you're looking at a Chaos Lord to get a leadership of 9, which is 215 points. Obviously, you're lacking in stats compared to that. I don't think it puts Generals of the Empire in the greatest position, and one of the reasons for that is the 3 attacks. Now, although that's only 1 less than other armies, it means you're getting much less use out of any magic weapons, like an ogre blade, let's just say. You're getting much less benefit out of that than other armies. The weapon skill remains quite low. Obviously, you're still hitting things on 4 that's higher than you, but it just means many more things are hitting you on 3s. So, how worthwhile the general is, I've not been convinced actually of having a general and really getting them stuck in yet in the games that I have played. Captain of the Empire at 45 points for the... Basically, you've got the same weapon skill, you 2 wounds, Initiative 4, 2 attacks, Leadership 8, but for half the points. Now, I think they're actually a much more competitive choice in that they're so incredibly cheap. One of the jobs that you tend to want to see on a captain, though, is to be the BSB, and you've not got a very survivable stat line there. It's one that is going to lead to you dying quite a lot. How I would kit these guys out, definitely with full plate on both of them. Easy choice for the 4-up. Taking shields just to make sure that when you want, you can have that 3-up quite easily. Like most things, having a -2 to the armor save, like lances, great weapons, a 5-up is actually pretty decent as an armor save, and then being able to take a talisman of protection or something like that for a 5-up is fairly solid on the armor save front. It's just that lack of toughness, not super high weapon skill, that sort of lets them down. Now, what they are good for is hold the line. So any unit the character joins automatically passes panic checks they are required to take. It's a good rule. It's obviously benefiting you from a more reliable army. I would have liked it to be immune to psychology with how stuff ties into detachments and regiments, but we'll get there. Now, in terms of mounts, Barded Warhorse is obviously to taste, as is the Empire Warhorse. Like, if you want to put them with, I don't know, Outriders, because you do, but it's not something I massively see there. So Barded Warhorse to go with Knights, don't have to massively go over that, I don't think. Now Pegasus for plus 30 points, which is plus 1 wound, 2 attacks at strength 4, so adds a little bit to your combat prowess. A captain on Pegasus that can hide near other units, potentially with one of the magic items or a brace of pistols or something, has been a pretty standard build for Empire across a couple of editions now, as well as Dogs of War, which played similar in 6th. And can be useful for a very cheap sort of, 45 plus the full plate, so 51, 81 points for a character on Pegasus that can hide near other units, and just hunt down Warmachines and just be a bit of a threat to real low-level units and just pick on things. I don't think it's obviously the greatest smash thing, but I've seen it enough times that I've been swayed over to it, especially as they can hide near units, only being monstrous cavalry, so you can sort of sneak up and then jump over the enemy army when they're getting a bit close. Demigryphs are one of the obvious choices, I think. I always tend to like this ground-based monstrous cavalry that a lot of things have. At movement 7, you're not slowing down a unit of Barded Warhorses. Strength 5 is solid with 3 attacks. Adding a wound and having AP -2 on its Wicked Claws is absolutely incredible. Countercharge, first charge, fear and swift stride all included in that. Now this is one of the better mounts. It's like when I did the Wood Elf review with Phil and we were going over the Stag. Obviously it's not quite as good as the Stag, but for 50 points is absolutely solid. And that I think is going to be one of the things that we go through in the list. Demigryph Knights are one of the standout units or more standout units in the list. So it's going to be on you, the player, how many Demigryph Knights and other ones of these things that might be less towards themes that sort of like, whenever you get a player playing Empire, a lot of the time it's like, they want to play spearmen and handgunners and make it work. There will be a level of these fantastical units because we're in a fantasy world. We need to all get used to it. I'm sorry, we need to get used to it. How many of these you need to take, and I think a solid choice is in the Demigryph. Griffins got 135 points for the base Griffin on 160 points for the Imperial Griffin. The difference being that you gain an additional wound on the Imperial Griffin. Your number of attacks stays the same, but you gain an additional strength on the Imperial Griffin. Now, being monstrous creatures and behemoths, it means that their stomp attacks on the Imperial Griffin will gain AP, which I think is the key bit of the difference between them and why I favour the Imperial Griffin, especially because they're both able to be targeted out, as monstrous creatures can be shot even when stood near other units. So Imperial Griffins I do prefer, and despite the fact that the laurels of victory has been taken off, so your Imperial Griffin can't stack up laurels of victory points, I do think the Imperial Griffin is worthwhile. It adds a bit of a threat to the Empire army that I think you need to be able to counterbalance other people's like fantastical creatures. Would I upgrade for the 2 heads for 20 points? Now this is obviously personal taste, but I'm not a massive fan of the like serrated maw attacks that comes with it. It's strength user, so strength 6, which is decent. But being armor bane 2, multiple wounds 2, I suppose it's good when you're playing ogres or whatever you call it. I would have preferred the extra attack to have the -2 AP though, because I don't like relying on those 6s to get armor bane and having no AP. It might be worth it just because you've got to invest a lot into your Griffin character because it just needs to tear through units. However, it's not to my taste to get more attacks that don't have an AP when it sort of needs to be your smashy thing as well, that might have to take on knights, heavily armoured infantry, and add combat res to combats, and this doesn't have an AP. So I do like the Imperial Griffin, just not the additional 20 points to get another serrated maw attack. So onto the magic items that you can get in the Empire army list. The Rune Fang for 100 points at strength user, AP -2, strikes first with magical attacks. You always wound on a 2+, so the strength user isn't too much of a problem. However, 100 points for AP -2, yes, it strikes first, which mitigates your initiative 5 a little bit. Do I think it's better than an Ogre Blade? No. Again, I always come down to this in the reviews. Do I think the Ogre Blade is particularly broken for 65 points? No. It's just a lot of these magic items within, say, like the specific army list, the non-generic list, I'm not or the magic weapons specifically, I'm not a massive fan of. I think a lot of them have been massively overpointed. Mace of Hellstrom for 65 points. You've got single-handed strength user magical attacks, or double-handed where you trade all of your attacks for 1 attack that's strength 10, AP -5, multiple wounds D6, and requires 2 hands. Now, this was the source of Spectral Doppelganger amazingness for the Empire. As much as Spectral Doppelgangers may be too much. Getting 2d6 with that double-handed, amazing. But Not being able to do that anymore definitely downplays the value of this mace. The one attack, if it auto hit, or you could get hatred onto your character, potentially it would be worthwhile. Being on characters that will largely be hitting on fours, that then removes a lot of the, like, half of the game you're just not hitting with your double hander. I think it's a real risk that that I don't know whether is worth it. Potentially still a spectral doppelganger double hander wizard, because you just do the one attack and it auto hits because it's spectral doppelganger, and then you get your additional attack as normal anyway. Potentially still a shout out for that, but just not as good as it was. And it is a big threat. Like, you could just pull off the big hit and just absolutely blast a dragon, but it's hard to recommend because it is so swingy versus, say, ogre blades. Ogre blades. The Sword of Justice for 50 points. You've got strength user, reroll failed rolls to wound, though, so it mitigates your low strength a little bit. AP -1, armor bane 1, multiple wounds 2. So he's reasonably nice. Whether it's worth 50 points when biting blades will spike on that 6 with a lot of armor bane, and potentially therefore get more wounds through rather than your AP -1 on the Sword of Justice. I just always struggle to find it. I struggle to recommend anything that's not a AP -2 with lances and such being AP -2 all the time, or great weapons that add to your strength. So maybe at my strength 4, I'd be going to strength 6 and not needing that reroll to wound anyway, and I've not eaten into my magic item allowance. I could have put that into something to make me more survivable, which is something my Empire is going to struggle with anyway. The Dragon Bow for 25 points. This is Commanders of the Empire only, and this is what I was saying a commander on Pegasus might like to be doing, with range 36, strength 6, AP -2, and multiple wounds 2. You're going to very much, with this, control where enemy wizards can move. They're going to be stuck to within 3 inches of units, which a lot of the time they are anyway, but as soon as you don't have that threat that can just take them out, they can have a lot more free reign to move forwards and maybe avoid your level 4 wizards that I'm going to be recommending you take in the Empire list. So I think the Dragon Bow for 25 points is cheap enough to recommend. AP -2, strength 6, he's going to be wounded a lot. Even if you just ping it into a knight's unit, is going to potentially get its points back. And I think a Pegasus, like, you only need to kill one knight to have justified the points of the Dragon Bow, and having it on a Pegasus that's just going to be hanging about doing stuff anyway as it gets into position to charge into an enemy war machine, I think is quite a good use for the Dragon Bow. Or maybe you have it on, say you've got 25 points left over at the end of someone on foot, your commander on foot's points allowance, pinging in the Dragon Bow into a unit, I think would be worthwhile, in the same way as people have been putting Ruby Rings of Ruin on battle standard bearers. This is just another way to do that in a different way. Magic armors, you've got the Armor of Fortune. So it's heavy armor, you get a 6-up ward, and immunity to killing blows special rule. If you're struck by a killing blow, they're permitted the armor and regen as normal, and the wound is unsaved, they lose a single wound. I think it's overcosted for what it is. I think the main source of Empire characters dying won't be the killing blows. It will be just getting my 2 or 3 wounds completely chipped off me very easily from low toughness. So for 45 points, like when we get down to, say, some of the talismans and talismans of protection, which offer a 5-up ward, I think that's much more of an attractive choice. The Armour of Tarnus, you get light armour, which may be purchased by an Imperial Wizard, even if they don't have the option to take armour normally. You also gain a 5-up ward against any wounds suffered. So 35 points isn't too bad. It's the same as taking a Talisman of Protection. the light armor bit is by the by, but what it does allow you to do is take something else in the talismans section if there's a good generic that you want to take, because these other two items in the Empire list are just doing largely similar for you anyway. Most of the time, though, you're going to want to take arcane items on your wizard. I don't see a lot of wizards taking ward saves, because you can just super glue yourself to a unit if you are actually in danger, and then not be targetable anyway. If you're getting into combat, it's a mistake you need to correct in the next game, I think, rather than expecting your wizard to survive in that combat. And if you're going to try and pull Spectral Doppelganger, Mate of Hellstroms or something like that, you can't have taken the Armour of Tarnus. The one thing that you can have done is Ogre Blade Armour of Tarnus on an Imperial Wizard, and that comes to the 100 points allowance. So it is a way of getting that 5-up ward in with a magical weapon. But I'd probably be taking a Lore Familiar rather than the Armour of Tarnus if I'm going to try and do a Spectral Doppelganger Wizard, because you never want to be at a point where you don't get that spell that just is entirely the purpose of your wizard. So he's a 5-up ward is hard to say it's bad, but it's also hard to recommend just because of how the armour operates and what it's designed for. Talismans, you've got the White Cloak for 30 points. It's a 5-up ward or a 3-up against any wounds that are flaming. Better than the Talisman of Protection slightly from the flaming thing. It's cheaper than the Talisman of Protection. Basically gives you access to 2 Talismans of Protection in your army. I really like this magic item. It's a 5-up ward save for 30 points. It's very good. This is always my go-to on my Lord, or I might change that about if my Lord's not hitting the magic items limit, and say my Battle Standard Bearer is, just to allow another 20-point magic item. But it's pretty auto-take in the same way that Talismans of Protection are. The Jade Amulet, immune to killing blow. If you're struck by a killing blow, you're permitted armour and regen, and instead lose a single wound. Again, I don't think this is the way that Empire characters die. If you were on a monstrous creature or behemoth, like your Imperial Griffin, that you might be a bit more worried about a spike of a 6 from Monster Slayer, this doesn't help you because you're only immune to killing blow. Yes, I suppose it helps you out a little bit on the Demigriff, but I'd still prefer the White Cloak or a Talisman of Protection in this category. And although you can have additional, because it's an extremely common magic item, so I can do this with another magic item, I just don't think it's worth it personally. I'm just not someone that ever likes to rely on those 6s, and I don't much account for them from my opponent, because I'm still getting a ward save anyway against killing blows. That's the main thing that's going to be saving me a lot of the time, especially when some things have like Armor Bane and stuff like that ends up removing your armor on a 6. So yeah, you might find a lot of work from this if there's a lot of killing blow in your meta in your area, but it's not something that I have massively found myself caught out on by not speccing into. So we mentioned before the captains are the good standard bearers, right? So what are the standards that they can take? You get the Imperial Banner for 60 points. All friendly units within command range roll 3d6 when making fear, panic or terror tests and discard the highest result. It's okay. If you have the Imperial Banner, you're likely going to be on UBSB. I think you've got to be on UBSB to get that points level. But you're already then going to be rolling your 2d6 and re-rolling if you fail. Yes, this makes it more of a surety. But for 60 points, I would have liked it to be including break checks as well. I know I'd pay 100 points and include break checks in that or something like that. but I just don't think it's fully worthwhile when a lot of my units are going to be ignoring panic by having a captain of the Empire in anyway, so it's not even affecting my big unit with a captain in. It's not affecting Templar units which have got Masters of the Knightly Orders in because they're immune to psychology. I just don't personally like it. The Griffin standard, 50 points, basically up to your usual maximum, your rank bonus gives you +2 per rank rather than +1. This is pretty stock standard for the Empire. Definitely needed in the list somewhere if you were playing with blocks of infantry. And at 50 points, it's a bit of a steal for what it's doing. But I have toyed with the idea of using a BSB in a free company unit because they've got hard, so we'll get +3 rank bonus from that. But I think it's worth a try. It's worth a try. I've not yet tried it out myself, but this is just a very good banner that ties into your Empire that will want to win on static combat res and outnumbering your opponents, and this helps with the static combat res side, and that if you can force them to take a break check while you're more than double them and they're running, this is just getting into that position that allows you to do that. You've got the Gleaming Pendant. You may re-roll a single failed leadership check, but not a break check. Kind of okay, but I'm already immune to panic. For 15 points, it might be nice to just throw it in there if you've got 15 points left over and you've not yet got a magic standard on a unit. There's no downside to that. But a lot of or at least one of your state troop units, I would imagine, is going to be veteran, so they don't need it. Yeah, I think it's a good. I've not got to make a big argument for a 15 point item, I don't think, but I think it's a good little thing if you've got 15 points left over. The Banner of Duty for 10 points may reroll a failed rally test. Maybe okay, but what is better than that is not breaking in general, and having the Gleaming Pendant will help with that outside of combat. And yeah, I don't much rate it. I'd prefer to put my points into stopping something from happening that's bad rather than coming back easier from things that are bad. But that's just my thoughts on game operation. We've got the enchanted items, the Laurels of Victory for 40 points. When determining combat res, each unsaved wound caused by an attack with the bearer of the Laurels of Victory count for 2 combat res rather than the usual 1. I think better on some characters than others. Definitely better on Master of the Knightly Orders than Empire Generals, because Empire Generals aren't towards the output side. And definitely best before the FAQ when your Griffin benefited or could benefit from this, arguably. But I suppose it's an FAQ, so they didn't change anything. It was always like that. Still all right. You need to stack up combat res where you can as an Empire player. This allows you to do it. I have not yet had this find its way into any of my lists because I've not been playing with a Master of the Knightly Order, and I don't see 40 points as worth it on a 3 attack character. But I'd much more strongly consider it on the Master of the Knightly Order rather than a General of the Empire. Just to slightly tip combat into my favour. Now, it's a bit of a shame that you can't take an Ogre Blade with it, but what you can do is take Biting Blades or the Sword of Justice with this. So I suppose that's one benefit to the Sword of Justice, is that you might just charge in and use your magic weapon to do a bit more. Likelihood is I could see this more being used. Obviously, it's a knight, so with a lance that doesn't take up magic item limit, having a white cloak on so that I've got a 5-up ward and it doesn't massively spill into my my magic item limit, so it just allows me a few different things in there rather than investing all my points in that magic weapon. The Silver Horn, 15 points. Characters with Swift Stride only. The bearer of the Silver Horn may re-roll the d6 when using Swift Stride. Surprisingly useful, I would say. The amount of times that Swift Stride is the one that lets you down is obviously at 30% of the time, because you roll 3 dice. And just being able to re-roll that for 15 points and getting that key charge, I do actually really like this magic item. Again, I've not been using it because I've not been using a Master of the Knightly Order. I do hope he's called a Master of the Knightly Order. I've not looked at this book today. I've looked at it previous days and slept since. Yeah, I think it's a good magic item for 15 points, ensuring that charge when you need it to happen. So the Shroud of Iron for 10 points. 6-up ward for the bearer and any unit they've joined against non-magical templates. Now for 10 points, spreading a 6-up ward to an entire unit. 6-up I usually completely write off, because I know it's half as good as a 5-up, and I quite like a 5-up, but it just seems to never trigger. But across an entire unit where I might have 30, 40 state troops in a unit, the amount that will save, so like if you get hit by an artillery shell, a rocket battery, a dreadquake mortar, any of these things, I think it actually is worth the points for only 10 points. Because it's one of those things where you're like, oh, I've got 10 points left, I can have another 2 handgunners or a Shroud of Iron. I'd put a Shroud of Iron, if I've got the magic item limit, just into a character that's in a unit to spread it, that 6-up ward reliably across the unit. Finally, we've got arcane items. We've got the Book of Ashore for 85 points. You increase your dispel range by 3, and unless you roll any natural double, apply +1 to the casting and dispel roll. However, if you roll a natural double, the book has proven to be a poor reproduction, and the +1 modifier can be applied to that roll. So it doesn't stop working the entire game, just for that one roll. So 1 in 6 times you're not getting +1, but I think combined with the dispel range increasing by 3, so you got a 54 diameter bubble that you dispel of your level 4 can be going off. I do actually really rate it, even for the 85 points in that it is. Wizard's Familiar for 35 points. 0 to 1 per wizard, may apply +1 to your dispel rolls. I like it for a lesser wizard. You can shut down a lot more magic phases with that +1. And I think it's definitely worth the investment for 35 points. The Wizard's Staff, +1 to their casting roll when casting an assailment or magic missile. It's okay. It's a very narrow window, especially when a lot of Empire magic, you sort of want to be going for like fiery vortexes and pinging them down enemy armies, is an effective use of them. 20 points to get it across one spell all game, like Fireball or something, is going to be worth it if you've gone for magic missiles. I just don't think it is. Obviously, it's a 20-point magic item versus the Book of Ashore, which is 85. Because the Book of Ashore is applying in all situations, because the Wizard's Familiar is applying to all dispel rolls, you're getting much more value out of them compared to the Wizard's Staff, which is just 2 types of spell. So yeah, he's harder to recommend because it doesn't trigger as often, but he's obviously still useful if you want that battle magic style wizard that wants to like blow up enemies from afar. So I've been mentioning the Master of the Knightly Orders as we went through all those magic items and weapons. Now, these are better combat characters than your Empire generals, but will operate in slightly different ways. So you've got, on the Grandmaster, Weapon Skill 6, Strength Toughness 4, Initiative 6, so an additional initiative as well as weapon skill over the Empire General. 4 attacks, an additional attack, but you are now 145 points, which includes heavy armour, as well as being forced to take a mount. You can take full plates, which is a no-brainer for +3 points. Shield for 2 points, which when you can either take hand weapon, great weapon, lance. Lance being the obvious one, because it doesn't take up that second hand. I'd be recommending Demigriff. Any of the options for the mounts have uses and are fairly solid. I personally like an Empire Captain on Pegasus because of being much cheaper. Like the chapter master of the Masters of the Knightly Orders. You've got the same weapon skill as a captain, strength toughness the same as a captain, wounds the same as a captain. You've just got an additional attack, essentially, maybe an additional initiative. For an additional 30 points, I think to have that as your Pegasus character isn't as point sufficient as just a captain on Pegasus, because it's that additional 30 points, right? Whereas to have them in a unit of knights, where you're going to be needing to stack up more combat res a lot more frequently, rather than just like, oh, I've killed 2 cannon crewmen, now I outnumber and run them down. That can be done by the captain. Stacking up more combat res all the time in units of knights, where you really need those knights to be shock cavalry, I think that then definitely falls within the realms of the Masters of the Knightly Order. This is where you can sort of justify more the Ogre Blades. You've got countercharge, first charge built in, immune to psychology, and that is passed on to any unit of knights, inner circle knights or demigriff knights that you might be leading. Now, why isn't immune to psychology on the Empire General as well? It just, I know that would then, with the detachments special rule, spread to detachments, but I don't see that as a massive problem for Empire players. You gain stubborn, veteran, rallying cry. So basically you do what an Empire General does, but better, but you're forced to be mounted and you're more points. It's worth it if you want a fighty character. It's a shame that you can't be on foot, because say Tutagen Guard, the old models that like were Middenland greatsword analogues with hammers, were all on foot. So it would have been nice to have the option of a Grandmaster on foot. But I suppose that then steps too much on the toes of the Empire Captain. It's good. I like the unit. It's not the most standout unit ever for 145 points, but it's a bit of a premium in the Empire list because you don't really get this combat power anywhere else. And yeah, definitely be recommending Demigriffs in large, because it just adds those 3 attacks at AP -2, so effectively takes you to 7 attacks at AP -2 with the lance included on your Grandmaster. Empire Wizards, we sort of covered off this in the magic items section because there isn't tons to talk about with them. For 130 points for the level 3, I'd definitely upgrade to level 4 because level 4s are the best, right? Pegasus versus on foot, I think, is the 2 ways that you're going to be running these, because Pegasus means that you can still hide near units and also have the ability to move out of your opponent's dispel range much more easily. I quite like that setup, but on foot is obviously viable as well, because some of the things like battle magic to give yourself Oaken Shield for your entire unit to gain a 5-up ward, there is definitely something to be said for. Elementalisms, Earthen Ramparts, I think can be quite good in Empire. It's something that other armies struggle to use because they want to get the charge. Whereas Empire, especially when we get to detachment special rules, your big units actually sometimes, a lot of the time, want to absorb charges rather than making them themselves, because you tend to have the upper hand in ranged engagements a lot of the time. So you having an additional turn to shoot before your enemy charges is largely fine. You get access to all the disciplines of magic, but battle magic I quite like for low value casting. Fireball's decent. Pillar of Flame is very good. Oaken Shield is good if you don't mind having your wizard in a unit to get it to keep working. Demonology is a very strong magic lore that I really like. It lacks a ward that I've been currently liking getting into my Empire army. Dark magic is solid, reducing your opponent's leadership. Really like it. Elementalism, Earthen Ramparts, Wind Blast is very good for forcing your opponent to give ground and just playing with their charge distances when you might have set up at the very extent of charge range, so then it forces them to spend another turn getting back into position. Illusion, Spectral Doppelganger, Ogre Blade, and there's obviously many more ways to play these. But one of the benefits of Empire is that it allows you to experiment with all these different laws. So I would encourage everyone to do that, because it's a lot of the other armies only have access to 2 or 3 laws. An Empire having access to all of these, except for high magic, is really fun and can be much more tailored to your own army than the advice that I can give during a guide. And it's one of the reasons I don't tend to do army lists included in the guides, is that hopefully you're equipped to write your own army list by the end of the guide, or at least have jumping off ideas, especially because meta army lists change so much across time. It dates the video very much. And I think with Empire Wizards as well, having this flexibility is what I'm getting at. Empire Wizards having the flexibility means that you, with no points difference, you can adapt to situation much more easily, as is the Empire sort of thing. Witch Hunters. For 55 points, you get a very basic stat line. It's weapon skill, ballistic skill, strength, toughness 4, 2 wounds, initiative 5, 2 attacks, leadership 8. You get a hand weapon and light armor. You can have a crossbow, handgun, pistol, brace of pistols. You can be mounted. But what you really want to be taking these for, if you want to be taking these, is the immune to psychology, killing blow, and suffer not the witch, the revenant, the mutant, or the demon. So each witch hunter in your army must have one of the following specialisms when you are writing your muster list. So you're locked into it for an entire event if you go to a narrative event or a tournament. The witch gives the witch hunter and any unit they've joined hatred, enemy wizards, and magic resistance 2. The revenant, you gain hatred undead and flaming attacks. The mutant, hatred warriors of chaos, beasts of chaos, magic resistance -1. And the demon, hatred demons, magical attacks. So the revenant helping with undead models, sort of, I also want magical attacks for that because it would help me with ethereal. The witch, hatred wizards, you don't tend to need help killing wizards in combat, so I'd sort of skip that a little bit, and just taking this character entirely for a magic resistance 2 on a unit, I'd skip. The better ones, just because they apply in most situations, I think, are the revenant and the mutant, because undead applies to vampire counts and tomb kings. The mutant applies to both warriors of chaos, beasts of chaos. So I do think they both have more chance of coming off. I don't personally like witch hunters because although they can have nice top hats, and like with the belt buckle on Puritan style, being locked into what you were facing at the start of an event, I don't think you get much use out of it then. Unless I don't particularly like writing a list to an opponent that I know I'm going to play. I don't like tailoring. I suppose across a campaign it's more obvious, like, oh yeah, I'm playing against Warriors of Chaos in this campaign. The mutant is the obvious one. I just think it's too specific. I think a more generalised benefit would have been better from witch hunters. Say like -1 magic resistance all the time. and then some lesser benefit versus any non-human race or something like that would have, I think, been better. Maybe any non-human or non-good aligned race. Because at the moment, I just don't think it comes off enough. Warrior Priests of Sigmar are on the entirely opposite side, I would say, to this in an Empire army. So 110 points, you get Elector of Sigmar at Leadership 8. Priest of Sigmar, 60 points, Leadership 7, which is key for your Prayers of Sigmar. And that's the main reason you're going to be taking these. Now, Prayers, you've got the Hammers of Sigmar. In the command phase, you make a leadership check. If passed, you can pick one of these, and it affects you and your unit most of the time. So Hammers of Sigmar, the model, its mount, and a single friendly unit within command range when it's chanted may reroll fail to hits or wounds of a natural one when made in the combat phase. Really good benefit, especially if you're getting a lot of attacks, say with a unit with spears. It can just trigger a lot more. Shield of Faith, you have a 5-up ward. The model and a single enemy unit within its command range, and that's going to be consistent, has a 5-up ward against any shooting attack or any wounds caused during the shooting phase. So really helps you win that artillery and range duel before combat's reached. I really like this, especially when combined with Hammers of Sigmar. So when you actually engaged, and you can change this every turn, so when you actually engage, you have another useful one. So it sort of plays into the Empire's adaptability of what you want to be doing. Soulfire, a single enemy unit that is in combat immediately suffers D6 Strength 3 with AP -2 that are flaming and magical. Now this is alright. I would have liked it to be in the combat phase, so they added to combat res. The fact that it's in the command phase takes down its viability, I think. On the flip side of that, the argument could be made that actually in the command phase I'm denying attacks to my opponent when it comes up to it, especially if they've got like a single line of knights or something like that. And I like that it's not just targeting undead. It's like the Soulfire of Sigmar is just raining down on anyone. So the Strength 3 is then arguably worth it because you could be facing like goblins, Bretonnians, other Empire, elves. It's useful against them all. Whereas if it was only useful against, say, like undead or something like that, you'd need Strength 4 for me to make a good argument that it was good. In actual stat line wise, you've got Weapon Skill 5 and 4 for the Lector and Priest. You've got Strength Toughness 4 on both. 3 and 2 wounds, 3 and 2 attacks. Now, obviously the better profile there is the Lector of Sigmar. It just is. You can take an additional hand weapon or a great weapon, so you can actually be kitted out fairly nicely. You can take heavy armor for 3 points, which I definitely do. I think really a great weapon and a shield with the heavy armor is the way that I tend to kit them out. I always like that AP -2 on the great weapons, and just getting more AP2 into a list I think is always worth it, because you can always then just choose to use a shield and hand weapon if you really need to use the shield. For a Warrior Priest of Sigmar, I tend to think that you want the Warrior Priest of Sigmar in your bigger foot troop units, where those you're going to get more ones to hit or to wound. Though there is an argument, I suppose, with Hammer of Sigmar to go into a knight unit where you can reroll your lances ones to wound, and obviously the to hits, but is where you tend to want to be either rolling a lot of dice to get a lot of ones to reroll to make it worthwhile, or be re-rolling 2-up. So say like wounding on a 2-up, you roll a 1, you re-roll it onto the 2-up again. That tends to be the places where you want to get a re-rolling 1s. Shield of Faith, 5-up against anything in the shooting phase. I suppose it's arguably good for both knights and foot troops. I've been liking putting it in my big units of state troops to just make them super solid, so that my artillery handgunners can sit there and pound away for a bit without me having to like charge forwards, and my foot troops aren't getting whittled down. So that's how I've been liking to run it. If you were running a cavalry heavy list, it definitely still works. It definitely still works. It's just that's how the units that I've been liking to take in, and that's one of the benefits of the Empire, I suppose. A lot of the advice I'm going to give is much more personal choice than say like in the ogres list, which there's more specific ways of running things. Maybe the ogres is a bad example, but you get what I'm saying. Warrior Priests of Ulrich. Now these are the same stat lines as the Lector of Sigmar and Priest of Sigmar. Again, it's basically exactly the same, except the prayers of Ulrich are different than the prayers of Sigmar. Prayers of Ulrich, you get Battle Howl, a model in a single friendly unit within command range makes a charge roll, apply D3 to the result, and can affect both infantry and cavalry, which is absolutely brilliant. Winter's Chill. Until the start of your next turn, subphase, enemy model that directs its attacks against this model, its mount, or a unit that is joined must re-roll to hit rolls of a natural 6, so is protecting you. And Wrath of Winter, your unit gains multiple wounds too, which can be absolutely incredible to just fending off enemy monsters, ogres, things like that. Both the Warrior Priest of Sigmar and Ulrich, I think, have their own uses. I'd recommend taking some of each in their army to apply it where best suits your army. Unless you're going for a specific theme like the Army of Middenland, I wouldn't be going entirely one way or the other. From a gaming perspective, I think a split of both is worthwhile. If I was going to really come down to it, I do prefer, for my own personal taste, the Warrior Priest of Sigmar, because I like that 5-up ward against shooting. And the re-rolling ones, there's never going to be a time where that's not useful at all. Applying D3 modifier to your charge, I think, is more situational. Winter's Chill re-rolling 6s, I think that's the better one, or the much more applicable one from this list. And Wrath of Winter is amazing if it's useful, and if it doesn't happen to come up in your game, is very likely, or very often, just completely useless, but can be incredibly, incredibly powerful. Oh my god. It's very hard to give advice across these warrior priests, especially comparing them, because they do their own thing. They're both useful. I'm just trying to find the most minute details of differences. So I prefer the lesser level priest, because even though it's leadership 7 at 60 points is an absolute steal, there's definitely a shout for going leadership 8 to get the prayers to trigger more frequently. I would have liked to see them leadership 9, actually, because surely they are... It's for chanting their prayers rather than spreading their leadership. And surely they boost morale to have priests around, or does everyone just hate the priests? Into the War Altar of Sigmar for 135 points. So this is a cavalry, it's more of a chariot rope. It's movement 7, strength toughness 5 for the War Altar, so your impact hits will be strength 5. You've got 2 barded war horses, which is strength 3. And you've got to have a Priest of Sigmar on. So what does it actually give you? You've got Close Order, First Charge, Holy Fervour, which is unless the unit is fleeing, all units within 6 automatically pass fear checks and reroll failed panic checks. Fairly good. Impact hits D6 plus 1, which is a nice amount. It's a large target. Magic resistance -2. Stubborn, but it sort of fits it narratively, but you don't ever want to have him to be used that stubborn. Symbol of Might. So the command range of Elector of Sigmar is increased from 8 to 12. If the model is a general, the command range is 18 as normal for a chariot mounted character. This will affect your prayers of Sigmar for the command range, because like the first time I read it through, I was like, if he's not the general, he's not doing anything. No, it's the prayers that range of 12 is affecting. Witchbane. All wizards within the command range suffer -2 to their casting rolls, which is a really nice benefit of the War Altar of Sigmar. One of the things, it's cheap enough as a mount to just have a cheap Lecture of Sigmar, like 95 points, on the war altar, be doing your command range prayers. You don't really want to, normally with something that gives -2 within the model's command range to enemy wizards casting, you think you want to just barrel it up. Now, that sort of goes against what a lot of your force is going to want to be doing, unless you've got a wing of knights or something that can keep it safe and just tail the wing of knights. Add first charge and impact hits to the knights unit, so I think that is a good pair. But outside of that, getting deep into the enemy lines to make use of the Witchbane, I think is a bit of a risky one. I think you want to be still playing the ranged game with a lot of mixed Empire lists, at least. Using your prayers, using your Holy Fervour on your battle line, and then adding the first charge when your opponent connects with you, so that you deny your opponent's ranks, add the impact hits. This is where some more damage is coming in for your regimental unit that might have absorbed a charge. So if you count on your regimental unit to be beaten in the first round of combat, and then they fall back in good order, and then you have your War Altar of Sigmar to be in a position to then countercharge, I think is a really effective way of using them. And yeah, so I suppose it's two. It's the go with a unit of knights, keep up with the knights but on a chariot, or be near the battle line as a countercharge unit, because it's going to be one of the damage outputs that you have in your list. Engineers, finally, in the heroes character section. You got 45 points for a ballistic skill 4, 2 wound character, which are going to be the main two things that you care about. You've got the Clouds of Soot and Smoke rule. The model is considered to be behind full cover whilst it was in 3 inches of a friendly unit whose type is War Machine. Helps you from not getting shot. Though I'd be completely hiding my model, much more likely. Master of Ballistics. Unless this model is fleeing or engaged in combat once per turn, a friendly Empire War Machine that is within command range may use this model's ballistic skill or re-roll a single artillery dice. This is one of the things that makes Hellblaster volley guns, I would say when we get there, better than Dwarf organ guns, in that you can re-roll the artillery dice if you need to, and then if you don't need to, you go, oh, I'm now going to be ballistic skill 4 for my shots, which is very, very useful, and it makes the damage output of that Hellblaster much better. In terms of the weapons that can be taken, I come down on, I think you want your engineer to be hidden and cheap at 45 points. But you can take, and I've seen grenade launching blunderbusses to be successful. I think one of the TSN Arena events, their Empire list had 2 engineers with blunderbusses, I believe. So what is that? The blunderbuss is a range 24, strength 4, AP -2, cumbersome and ponderous weapon. So you can't make stand and shoots with it, and if you move, it's at -2 rather than the usual -1. But with a range of 24, you can sit there and just be firing it. If the to-hit roll is successful, the grenade launching blunderbuss, it does D3 plus 1 hits rather than the usual 1, but obviously doesn't take the multiple shots penalty because it's multiple hits. The AP -2 is the most attractive thing, I would say, from the grenade launching blunderbuss. Every time I look at the profile, it makes me reconsider whether or not I think Empire engineers should have them. I just tend to worry too much about my Empire engineer dying. So if I'm taking engineer, my thought is to it's 45 points to just keep my War Machines going. Whereas I suppose the list that did well at a tournament that I know of was just like, it's more output, just get more output in there, which is obviously a way of thinking as well. And maybe ignore me, it did well at a tournament. So yeah, a very solid weapon. The Hockland long rifle, This is the first time we've seen it. It's range 36, strength 4, AP -1, armor bane 1, can't stand our shoot and is -2 if moving, and you can target a specific model within the target unit, such as a champion or character. Now, I really like the Hockland long rifle. The engineer isn't where I'd put it. I think if I was going to give them a weapon, it'd be the grenade launcher, though there is something to be said for the Hockland long rifle, just being able to pick out those characters, being able to pick out wizards. I'd probably start with the champion first, just so that there can't be a lookout sir roll done, which is just rubbish, right? Which is just rubbish. Pigeon bombs, a 20 points upgrade for the engineer. It's like the frog from the generic magic items list. Very cool, but I would not bother with it at all. So instead of making a shooting attack, you can choose an enemy unit that's within 24 inches and roll on the pigeon bomb table. 1. Bird brain. Confused in the battle, the pigeon returns to its handler. Center the blast over the engineer. Strength 4, AP -1. 2 to 3, so these half of the time it's doing nothing, because 2 to 3 do nothing, or it's hurting you. 4 to 6, a dud. The target unit takes a single strength 5, AP -2 as the dud bomb falls on someone's head, and it's just like a falling rock. That's okay. Probably not worth 20 points, though, to only have that happen half the time. And then 6, perfect delivery. Place a small blast. So its central hole is over the centre of the target unit. Any model underneath suffers strength 4, AP -1 for the explosion. So only on a 6, only 1 in 6 pigeon bombs, 1 across the game, is actually going to explode on an enemy unit. And you're as likely to do a wound to yourself as you are to do them to enemy units on any turn. Or at least with the explosion. So, not worth it, I would say. The main thing, I would say, in defense of the pigeon bomb is that your Master of Ballistics rule doesn't require you to forgo shooting, so you can use pigeon bombs and also use the Master of Ballistics. So you can do both, so one isn't stopping you from doing the other. And it's pigeon bombs. Pigeon bombs are funny and cool. so maybe there's a good argument for doing that, because you're already a massive fluff player if you're playing Empire, or at least that's what I'm telling myself when I lose all my games. So on to the main unit section of the Empire. We've got 2 types of troops to start off with in the state troops. Normal state troops, veteran state troops. State troops, you've got 3s across the board, leadership 7, 5 points, movement 4, and veterans, you just get weapon skill 4 on top of the rest for 7 points. You also, as a veteran, gain veteran as a skill. Who knew? Is it worth the upgrade to 7 points to gain veteran and weapon skill 4? I've seen it both ways, and actually what I've ended up coming down to is that my veteran troops, with only having light armor, even when they've got shields, die so easily that they might as well just not be veteran. Now, that's in my big block, so I've been taking these 2 ways. I've been taking a big block of state troops, up to 50 is where it's reached now. And I know that sounds entirely unwieldy, but a lot of people's regiments in other armies come to 250 points. So to expect my unit to do as well as someone else's regiment, I've got to be putting the same amount of points into it. So coming to 250 points isn't completely out there. So say even 40 state troops with full command, approximately like 215 points there. That you can expect obviously the same points to do the same points amount as effectiveness, so long as the odds are in your sort of like calculated favour, in your right environment, not getting charged by a unit of knights downhill, whatever. So yeah, I've been taking a big block of state troops, and it gives me a bit of survivability, a bit of grind, to know that I can take a charge, have a load of combat res when they've denied my ranks from first charge. They're not going to double me out easily, and it only takes one turn of me winning combat after a couple of turns of losing, and I'm like, well, I'm still double +1 you, and then I get to just break the enemy, and they just run away, and I can try and run them down. So that's the benefit of a big unit of state troops. Veteran state troops, you're obviously being hit on 4s rather than 3s by enemies which are weapon skill 4, which comes into it fairly often. Now, you are still let down by a low armor value because you've only got light armor, and you're paying additional to gain a shield, an additional point. So I was using my veteran state troops in a block of 28, and it hasn't honestly fared as well for me as the larger block of normal state troops have. Now, where I have found veteran state troops to be good or better is in my detachment units. And for that, we'll go over the rules a little bit, just touch on them, of what a detachment is and what a regimental unit is. So, regimental units are basically just what you would think of as the main unit. It's a parent unit. You make it normally with a command group, etc. You then can purchase up to 2 detachments, which are the detachment units. I mean, it all just sort of follows. Those detachment units can't have command groups, and they can only be up to half the size of the regimental unit. So one of the benefits of that big unit of 40 state troops is that I can have a detachment that's up to 20. Now, the detachment can use the leadership characteristic of the regimental unit when it's within 3 inch of that unit, and that 3 inch is going to come into it a few times across these detachment rules. Regimental psychology, when within 3, you gain frenzy, immune to psychology, stubborn, or hatred of your regimental unit that your detachment is near. And this is why I was saying the immune to psychology would have been nicer on the commander of the Empire, because being immune to panic obviously isn't the same as immune to psychology, so it doesn't spread from the regimental unit to the detachment, whereas if I had immune to psych, it would. So it just seems a bit of a... Well, it's a non-interaction, and it's a bit of a shame that it's a non-interaction, if you ask me. Supporting action, so this is a benefit you gain for your detachment when your regimental unit is attacked. And this is going to be the bigger nuance of how you use your detachment units. So you can do one of 2 things as a detachment if your regimental unit does not flee as a charge reaction. You can do supporting fire, so essentially you just do a stand and shoot reaction with your detachment unit in addition to whatever the regimental unit is doing, and that is if you're within 3 inches of the regimental unit. That will mean that you can have, say, like a unit of handgunners on a hill behind your regimental unit, something like that, or off to the side and fire over. So long as you are within... One model is within 3, it can do it. What you need to be cautious for there is if you fall back in good order and that supporting fire unit is directly behind, you'll obviously skip over that unit that is supporting fire. So just be careful, position more off to the sides maybe, so that you don't fall back in good order and pop off the table. It's something that in the very first game that I tested out Empire with for the channel, like I was like, I'll have a unit of handgunners on a hill and I'll put my regimental units in front of them. Oh no, I just pop through them and off the table. So just be careful with that. Supporting charge, this is the one with a bit more nuance, I think. So any detachment that's able to make a supporting charge action may declare it that it will make it. At the end of the charge move subphase, a detachment that is declared a supporting charge and is not engaged with an enemy or fleeing makes an out-of-sequence charge against one enemy unit that charged into contact with the regimental unit. So basically, enemy charges into your block in the middle, your detachment unit can charge in the side. Now, you still got to make it illegal, you still got to be a legal charge, so you sort of want to be as far wide as you can and as far forward to then be able to flank charge into the enemy, because otherwise, if they just contact the front of your state troops block, it can mean that you actually can't make that supporting charge because there's nowhere for you to fit into that combat. One way that I've actually found to make this work is if you have your large regimental unit in open ground and your detachment unit within 3, maybe slightly angled in, and you can even be slightly forwards when doing this, in terrain. Right, so here is a little demonstration in Warhol, actually. It's quite a good app if anyone wants to like bash out some games, try out armies before you commit to buying them. I don't think it has anything on actually playing the game in person, like nowhere near, but I do think it's good before committing to like hundreds of pounds worth of purchase. And it's good for demonstrating this today. So if we have an Empire regimental unit that's going to be charged by an Orc unit, my supporting unit in this forest is less of a valuable target because my opponent would have to roll 2d6 and pick the lowest and -1 to their movement value. So it deprioritizes my flanking unit, my supporting unit, from being charged itself. My regimental unit, I'm making more of a crackable target, more of an easier target to engage, so prioritizing it for my enemy a little bit. The Orcs, when they move in and contact, I'm now in the flank of that Orc unit to be able to side charge it and get +1, as well as breaking the ranks of the enemy when they actually charge me. So it's a really important little maneuver to be able to stack static combat res in your favour, because certainly the Orcs will likely just batter you one-on-one in combat just by doing so many more wounds than you do. If we take separately to that, if I have a unit set up, I know it's on a hill, but let's just say it isn't. If we've got an Orc unit coming in, my supporting unit, if it's back here, won't be able to engage the Orcs in the flank. So I need to push the unit forwards. But at that point, what's to stop the Orc unit merely engaging my detachment first and then reforming to turn into my Empire State Troops block? So I think using the little trick of having your big block in the open and then your detachment in some terrain just allows you to prioritize what your opponent is going to do and make it the logical choice for them to do what you want them to do. So with 40 state troops being what I have played with, 20 veteran state troops, I think, coming in on the side allows your weapon skill. So you're only adding 1 for the side and close order, as well as denying any ranks that they may have. So what you also need to think about is denying the enemy combat res from simply killing your troops that charged in. Like, obviously you'll get additional initiative for charging in on the side, but if you were taking more than 2-3 casualties from your unit charging in around the side, taking that you might... So what you'll have to do when using your detachments is think, how many combat res are you likely to add to your side, swing in your favour, and deny to your enemy? So if I deny 2 ranks through my unit going into the side, as well as getting 1 for my own flank and adding a close order, I've got 4 extra combat res from that. Not counting on killing many opponents. If you're facing goblins, obviously you'll kill them, but then you probably won't need detachments for your big unit of state troops to take out those goblins. So 4 is, for a ranked up unit, the number that I need to not die from my detachment unit. Otherwise, it's not been worth it. All I've done is whittle down another unit and added combat res to the enemy as much as I've added combat res to mine. So I like veteran state troops to be on that side. It allows you, with veteran state troops, to have drilled, which means your flanking unit you can keep very narrow or have wide, and then narrow the unit to be actually further off to the side, because anytime obviously with drilled you're going to be moving your unit. I can have a longer unit that starts within 3, declares my action, then goes to make the charge move, compresses, and now where I'm charging, because I'm drilled and actually now my centre of my unit is further out, I'm going to be into the side much more easily. So I really like veteran state troops more as a flanking force than my state troops being the big block in the centre. Now, on size of detachment, you need to start thinking about 2 things. You want it to be big enough that it's going to break ranks of any heavy infantry, so that gives you a minimum size of 10. You need to be able to absorb some casualties while still breaking those ranks, because it's calculated at the end of combat. So now we're on maybe, even with a 4 deep unit, likelihood is that at least 2 of your flanking unit is going to die from additional attacks. I say likelihood. One of, like, a bad scenario, 2 of your flanking unit is going to die from additional attacks that you've added. So you need at least 12 if you don't take any range casualties, things like that. So actually, I quite like detachments at around 16, 18, maybe even 20 for my detachment of combat troops. They can go, because I don't need any additional rank bonus, they can go 4 wide so long as they're no deeper than 4. If I went 17, I'd have to go 5 wide, so that they're not in a marching column, that is. And at that level, you can start having some staying power in your detachment. If you don't think this flanking charge ends up being on, your veteran state troop unit can then go and pursue other agendas on the table, rather than just hanging around the side waiting for an enemy to come to your big regimental unit. Because you've got veteran, because you've got drilled, and you can just like meander off in a marching column on the turn that you decide, oh, I actually need to reposition this. So I think they fall nicely into those 2 roles. Thrusting spears, halberds versus just keeping them as swordsmen. I don't think that there's actually as much of a difference between all of them as there used to be. Halberds obviously nice for the -1 AP. I have been leaning both with my Bretonnian peasants and state troops into thrusting spears at the moment. I do really like them, and if you have access to a magic banner, potentially you can start getting like the razor standard. On your flanking unit, you don't particularly want spears, I wouldn't say, because even though in the second round of combat it's going to help you, first round, that's when you want something like halberds, because you're charging with your plus up to 4 initiative. So I think the regimental unit, much more into spears, personally. Flanking unit, sword and shield, just to not add killy combat res to your opponent as easily, though only going to a 5-up save. Is it worth it? And that's when the halberd starts looking a bit attractive to add killy combat res to your side from your detachment. So I've actually quite a few things to think about on the Empire State Troops front. I have enjoyed playing with them. Do you know what? This is the point in the video where it's like this is how I've run them. Actually, if anyone has any thoughts to put in the comments, please do put them down there. I do read all the comments, because it's something that I run a few different armies and I formed my own opinions, but I'd still love to hear what has been working for everyone, because we all need to just make Empire the best. So, on to state missile troops. These can come in regimental and detachments as well. There is something to be said for 10 missile troops and then 2 detachments of 5, but potentially just having 10 10 over the other side, because one of the downside of the battlefield, because one of the downsides of detachments and regiment units is you've got to deploy together. Handguns versus crossbows. I do actually like handguns for only 1 point a model. Having that AP all the time, I really like. The extra range of crossbows, there's an argument for a mix. I think handguns being the more reliable armor-piercing metric. It's hard to come down on one side or the other. I personally, in an Empire army, because lots of other races get access to crossbows or bows, I just like my regimental state troops to stand out a little bit and have handguns. And I know that's maybe a silly reason for recommending them, but that's just my train of thought in it. I wouldn't ever take a standard in the state missile troops. Sergeant, arguable. I think it's a nice place to put Hockland Long Rifle just to get one into your list. It's the same ballistic skill as an engineer, so if you want one in your list, there's no real downside to putting it here. Brace of pistols, fairly useless. Drilled, both the crossbow, and normally I'm like, yes, drilled, all the time, drilled. Because you get -2 to hit with a move or fire on both the crossbow and the handgun, you never want to be moving them once you've deployed them anyway. So, because even with drilled, you count as moving that turn. So you can't drilled into a marching column, move somewhere, and then drilled out the next turn and count as stationary. You might as well just move a bit less and not count as moving in 2 turns. If you're going to be moving for more than 2 turns, that's half of the game or a third of the game until you're effective again on the 3rd turn, halfway through the game. So you just need to be careful deploying them because you won't really be redeploying them. As I said, I like 10 and 2 5-man detachments. And yet there's no real massively wrong way to go about them. Detachments for my state troops unit, I do quite like. Well, you could have 10 handgunners on a hill off to the side in 2 ranks of 5 so that you're not getting in the way of a load of other things. I think that's quite a nice way to run detachments of missile troops. 5s is so cheap, being 40 points for 5 handgunners, just to have as speed bumps around, even just stand in front of your regimental unit so that you can take first charges and things like that. Is just a nice little way of using them. But yeah, I think they're fairly solid, fairly cheap. Don't see much wrong with them, but they're not absolute game winners that I think some people are expecting at the start of the Old World for shooting to do much more damage than it actually does. But they think of them more as stripping rank bonus off units rather than annihilating units. So on to Free Company Militia. What to say about these? Now, for a long time these were considered, at least in 6th edition, what you would take as detachment units. And that is a little bit what their supposed role is in the Old World. They're cheap, but they're not as cheap as actual state troops, which is weird, because with Impetuous, that's like, it's a downside. They should get points reduction for it. Yes, you have 2 hand weapons and throwing weapons just built in, but with Open Order, so you're not adding that +1 for close order when you charge in the side using your supporting charge. Yes, you've got Horde, so you could take 20 Free Company Militia and add +3 combat res through ranks, but I just don't think they're reliable enough. The weapon skill 3, no armor, no access to shield or anything, means they're going to be adding combat res to your opponent. I'm not a massive fan of Free Company Militia, and it's actually something that I felt as well in other editions of the game. They add combat res to your opponent in a place where they should be adding static to your side and your side alone, really. One sort of like joke way I've considered running them is just as a standalone unit with a BSB in there, Griffin standard, to double that Horde 3 rank bonus to 6. You're obviously getting Warband there as well, so with a militia leader, you're on leadership 10. So it's slightly an argument that they can stick around a little bit, but that would benefit them more as a regimental unit rather than a detachment unit, which seems to be what they're meant to be trying to do. I think they just occupy a bit of an awkward space in the Empire list, which is a bit of a shame because Free Company look really nice in like the ragtag sort of way in which they are. But I think especially being more points than an Empire State Troop just really lets them down. Because I could just take a State Troop and I've got built-in light armour, 6 points, I've got a sword and light armour, and therefore much more survivable. Having 2 hand weapons, there's a little bit to say for, so when you charge in on the side, potentially you then end up striking first. You've got 2 attacks each, so get more attacks to add into that combat. But in my experience, just getting that definite close order when you flank charge into the side is really valuable. Stacking up your number of close orders is better than relying on getting more attacks as an Empire player. If you're charging into the side of something really squishy, my regimental unit should be able to deal with them anyway. Obviously, there will be some situations where you really want to get into the side of it, say like zombies or skeletons, where you can actually put some hurt out on that unit. So there's a place there, but I wouldn't rely on it as much as I'm comfortable relying on veteran state troops or just even state troops to do the same job and not go charging off when I don't want them to as well. Empire Archers at 7 points a model. I'd basically just call it 8 points a model because you're going to want to take Fire and Flee, I think. You can take as both a detachment or just on their own. They've got skirmishers built in. I think they're a really good screening unit for in front of your regimental units. You fire and flee, end up behind the main unit, and they follow on into your regiment, adding combat res there. Now, there's a bit of 50-50 in the supporting fire, as supporting actions only require your regimental unit to not flee as a charge reaction. Well, I can only hold and flee if a unit is following on into a unit behind. So that it ticks that box. Supporting fire from other units would then require me to be able to make a stand and shoot reaction, it seems, anyway, otherwise I'll stand idly by. But say I have a unit of Empire Archers that fire and flee, the regimental unit behind then absorbs the charge. The supporting charge action doesn't have the stipulation that I just stand there if I can't do a normal reaction. So charge reaction hold for my regimental unit would allow another detachment to supporting charge after they've redirected the charge from charging through Empire Archers detachment. Now, the way that I'm saying it as a detachment of Empire Archers is because of that spreading of leadership. I quite like to allow me to do actions. I think they're good to put in front of your units so that I could just stand and shoot and absorb the first charge from knights or chariots so that my regimental unit behind don't get their ranks denied when the combat ends up into them. So I quite like them working in tandem. Maybe that doesn't require them as an actual detachment, then you can have 2 detachments on the main regimental unit, but how I've been setting them up is just as a detachment so that I can get any leadership bonuses or things like that that the main unit has, and just operate a bit more in tandem. Scouts, as the other way to play them for +1 points a model, there's something to be said for having scouts, obviously. I don't know how... I've not had much use of it, or even... I've not been in a game where I've been like, I really wish I'd taken my Empire Archers as a normal unit rather than... so that I could scout them rather than a detachment. That hasn't come up for me yet. But it may do for you. It's not a wrong thing. I just quite like them as the first charge denier as a special rule for my regimental units. Is the main focus that I've had on them. Empire Greatswords. Now, 11 points a model, they're weapon skill 4, then human stat lines of strength, toughness 3, initiative 3. They've got leadership 8, which is solid. The Count's champion has weapon skill 5, and he's plus 8 points. Fairly good. They come with stubborn, which I like, close order, and a regimental unit. 0 to 1 per 1,000 points can have drilled, veteran, or a magic standard, which I really like. Drilled, definite for putting on the Empire Greatswords. Veteran, definite, so they can operate independently of the BSB and be much more of a flank anchor or something like that. Now, I have not had them be incredibly effective. If you can manage flank charges with them, so they go up to initiative 5 on the charge for getting that plus 4 to their initiative, they can be quite effective. But with a human stat line being weapon skill 4, I would have actually quite liked them all to be weapon skill 5. I know they've got full plate, so they're on a 4-up save, but when you compare them to other sort of 13-point models when you factored in the drilled, yes, you've got drilled, yes, you've got full plate, but a lot of those other 13-point veteran style infantry units have other things that make them much better, like Knights of the Realm on foot, which aren't the most competitive choice ever, have the Blessing of the Lady. They've got a Furious Charge for 2 attacks each on the charge, which just adds up to a much more... It's more survivable because they can have heavy armor and shield for shooting, and then they've got a ward on top of that. They get double the amount of attacks when they're charging in. They just feel to me a bit lackluster, Greatswords, and I have taken them in every game of that I've played with Empire up to now. I'm going to continue taking them because I just really like Greatswords as models, and the like grizzled Landsknecht two-hander Zweihander veterans. I don't think they're in the greatest of places at the moment. Now, in terms of the detachments that you want with them, archers, because they can move, because I want them more as a support, a flank unit, they might want to move a bit more, so I don't particularly want anything that's going to have to stay still to do work. So I'd forgo handgunners and crossbowmen that I'm more likely to have on my large regimental unit of state troops, because that's going to sit there near my artillery and take charges in key positions. The greatswords, I want something that can maybe not keep up, because these will be marching, but that can move up with them to potentially get that the supporting fire or supporting charge along with them. Veteran state troops in a small detachment I really like, because they also have drilled, so can both go into marching columns, march, and come out of their detachment, their marching columns in another position, which is really good. You're going to need something that can just keep up with them and operate more flexibly than, say, your big unit of state troops. It's a bit more unwieldy than, say, what I've been running is 21 greatswords. I've tried out 16 a couple of times, or 15, 18, like around those numbers, so it's not like a humongous block. But when you get into much smaller than that, and like I've tried out that are similar, Knights of the Realm on foot with great weapons, when you get into 10s and things like that, they're very fragile. The front rank dies very fast, so then you've got no output when these guys are here, all about the output. If they're just going to die and provide static combat res, you might as well just be taking a regimental state troops unit rather than greatswords, because even regimental state troop units, you can get the generic banner of giving you stubborn, and then you've just got the benefits of the greatswords over the regimental state troops. So yeah, I like them as a unit, going to keep taking them, but I think they're a bit lackluster at the moment. Maybe weapon skill 5, just as a standard. I mean, they're as good as veteran state troops, when really they're like the real creme de la creme, surely. Finally, we've got flagellants on the foot troops of the Empire for 13 points a model, so 2 points more than a greatsword, or the same points as a drilled greatsword. You get weapon skill 3, strength toughness 3, 1 wound, initiative 3, 1 attack, leadership 5, but you don't care. 2 attacks on the sergeant or the Prophet of Doom champion, and you can take a standard bearer for 7 points a model. I'm not sure I'd actually take that standard bearer because how this unit operates, close order, it's got unbreakable, immune to psychology, so you're just not going to care. You don't care about having leadership 5 because you're just not moving all day. You've got hatred all enemies and feel no pain, which gives you a 6-up, essentially like regen or ward save, versus anything that isn't magical. If that attack is strength 5 or higher, you get a 5-up ward, so it's like the blessing of the lady. And they've got Furious Charge for 2 attacks, flails, so they're +2 strength in the first round of combat. There is a lot to like about this unit in that it doesn't drop your initiative down to 1 like the Greatsword does. They get 2 attacks each on the charge. They're a bit expensive for a unit with no armour, but that's slightly made up for by the feel no pain. They are still close order, so they don't suffer from, say, like the Free Company's drawback of only being open order. I really like them, especially as an unbreakable unit. It can be left on its own on the flank and just be like, I'll just tie you up with an unbreakable unit that doesn't need babysitting. I think it's very good. The benefit that they got over Slayers, like of having that -2 AP as well as having the feel no pain, definitely very nice. Whether they're the most competitive choice is again a massive consideration, but I think at least a small unit to tie something up, or if you really want to commit to them, a block that will just never move, can both be done. They're fairly hard hitting with the flails, and I actually think a better choice than the Greatswords in similar points level, especially because you can add a warrior priest to them so that they've got a 5-up all the time versus shooting. They're the only characters that can join the unit, and they gain unbreakable so that they don't deny unbreakable to the flagellants when they're in there. Now, the 5-up ward that you can get versus shooting obviously massively benefits flagellants because they've got no armour normally, so it doubles your feel no pain save essentially. Rerolling 1s from a lot of flails can be very effective in the second round of combat and things like that when hatred's not triggering. But obviously it's just to taste. I quite like the unit of flagellants. I don't see it as the most competitive choice in the world because they've got no armour, so will die to shooting, but I think they're definitely better than Slayers and definitely have more of a place than Slayers, which have got feel no pain, which is just craziness. So next we get onto the Cavalry. We start off with Pistoliers, 16 points a model. You've got 3s across the board, leadership 6, 1 attack, and you've got a brace of pistols. So that will mean you're able to get +1 attack in combat. Sadly, it's only strength user, so which is a bit weird. Why wouldn't, I suppose you're clubbing them with your pistols rather than firing your pistols, but it seems a bit weird that you don't get that strength 4. Now, the big drawback to Pistoliers is that they have Impetuous. Now, that sort of flies in the face of the fact that your best damage output with them is having a brace of pistols and shooting with those pistols. So you want to sort of ride up to the enemy and then fire and flee 2d6 because you've got Swift Stride, because fire and flee is only normally 1d6, but you can add your Swift Stride to that for 2. The problem is that you've got Impetuous. So really, other than it's going to mean that you charge with this light unit of Pistoliers quite often that don't have any AP. So to mitigate that on the first turn, what you really need to be doing is riding up to give yourself as many charge targets as possible in turn 2, so that if you do fail your Impetuous, you can charge one that you've actually got a chance of destroying. So you need to be careful with them in that way. After you either pass that Impetuous or hopefully win a combat, you can mitigate the Impetuous a little bit by being in an annoying position for your opponent and then fire and fleeing, and because you fled, you're then not eligible to make a charge in the following turn. So you get round your impetuous rule by not being able to make a charge. So after you've had that initial impetuous roll, as long as you've succeeded on it, it means that you can sort of mitigate it so long as you're in the most annoying possible position for your opponent at all times, which is sort of what you want to be doing anyway, like fire and flee and brace of pistoling people to death. There's two ways of thinking about running them, really. You can go minimum unit size, and I would have a musician, and I would have a champion for that extra leadership and the extra leadership when rallying, but on both unit sizes. But the two ways is minimum unit size of 5 so that you don't lose a lot if you fail that impetuous roll in the wrong time, or a big unit so that if you fail the impetuous roll, you've actually got a chance of overwhelming like another light cav unit or a skirmisher unit, something like that. I've been favouring the small unit, but in speaking to other Empire players, they've had success running a big unit and just barreling into people in that first turn if you fail the impetuous. If you're skirmishing, it does allow you to fire and flee with a lot of pistols, which is really useful. But if you're skirmishing, you obviously then you've got a 360 charge arc, so you can be charging in any which direction. If you don't end up fleeing in a turn, you are pretty much always going to have to roll for impetuous on the next turn. Counter charge is quite nice, though you've obviously got no AP, so a lot of the time you will just want to fire and flee anyway. Do you want to upgrade the weapon on the veteran? I wouldn't say so. I like the brace of pistols. The grenade launching blunderbuss is obviously good, but it's ponderous, so if you move, you're firing at -2. This isn't really the unit to be doing that with. 0 to 1 unit per 1,000 points can have Vanguard. Now, this is sort of a bit of a toss-up. There's some sort of like mindset that wants it, in that you can go first, be closer, hope that you pass that impetuous roll, and then don't charge. Whereas if you don't take Vanguard, unless the enemy moves really far forwards, you're not going to have to make your impetuous roll on the first turn, so then you move really far forwards and immediately get into your interplay of falling back and returning. So if you not being in charge range on the first turn, because Vanguard doesn't prevent you from charging or having to declare a charge, not having Vanguard can be advantageous when really you would think, oh, Vanguard, I want that because it's a light cav unit. Normally it's an auto include in a light cav unit that can take it. But there's just a bit more to think about. I would like to see them just drop impetuous, because although it's a fun little interplay, it's like old orcs and goblins where it just, for a light cav unit, it just doesn't work. Yeah, and I know orcs and goblins still have impetuous, but their units aren't as expensive as lots of in the Empire list. I don't think Pistoliers are reliable enough to be worth it when other units are reliable. Now, Outriders, for 19 points a model, so only 3 points more a model, they have fire and flee, they're an extra ballistic skill, they've got Vanguard built in, still skirmishers, they've got single pistols, which is the same for when you're doing ranged pistoling, repeater handguns, which are solid weapons for, although they're ponderous, you can still fire your pistols, obviously. You can fire the repeater handguns and fire and flee. They've got heavy armour rather than light armour, and because you've not got impetuous, the sharpshooter in the squad can take a grenade launching blunderbuss much more justifiably, because he's got BS5 as well. So he's just seems to be all round a much better unit, although not quite as good in combat, in that you're not getting the 2 attacks in combat, you're only getting 1. For what you actually care about, which is be operating as a light cav unit that's got pistols, they seem to just be the superior option in all ways. which is a shame. Which is a shame because I love Pistoliers. I'd be tempted to model my Outriders as Pistoliers when I get there, but yeah, by which I mean like with a pistol shooting off into the distance or whatever. But yeah, Outriders I think the much better option than Pistoliers for how the Empire list wants to be reliable and how that unit operates as a light cav unit, which needs reliability. Next, we've got the Empire Knights for 21 points a model. The unit size 4 up, which I suppose is the same as the Outriders, but is interesting being a 4+ unit because it means for 84 points, you can have 4 Empire Knights as just a blocking unit, which come with heavy armour, lances very cheaply for 1 point a model, shields just built in, so they're on a 4 up save, barding for a 3 up. You've got weapon skill 4, strength toughness 3, initiative 3, 1 attack, leadership 8. 2 attacks on the champion, which is obviously cheaper for 6 points than upgrading to 5 models in the unit. So you, for 92 points a unit, you can get lances and a champion and just throw them as a throwaway unit into like enemy tough nuts to just whittle away ranks and things like that. What I quite like doing with a small unit as well is being that's the one with drilled, in that it keeps the points down to only 1 point, like only 1 point a model, 4 points for the units have drilled, and then they're motoring up 21 inches in the first turn and getting into a real threat position. Empire Knights, I think you want larger units if you want something to crack enemies. Having the static combat res, having a rank, I think is definitely useful to get more staying power. Stubborn as an option for 2 points a model. Although that helps with the staying power aspect, I don't think you want to be like grinding out a combat with them. If you ever choose to fall back in good order anyway, like your shock cavalry knight shouldn't have gone into that unit. So I don't think you actually want to be taking stubborn. I think it's a bit of a red herring. I'd prefer to just run and outpace the enemy than get locked into a fall back in good order cycle where my lances just never trigger for me. But yeah, 10 models in a unit. You can purchase magic items on the preceptor, so this is where your re-rolling of a swift stride dice could come in if it's not on demigriffs or Knights of the Inner Circle. As a core choice, I think they're really solid, and yeah, make a real good unit in the Empire army for adding weight to one flank or just being a threat. Especially when you think a lot of armies' fast cavalry units will be a similar price to Empire Knights, and your Empire Knights are obviously much more heavily armed and armoured, and will do more damage by having the lances rather than cavalry spears or something like that. So cheap enough to fulfill the combat fast cav role, I would say, despite the fact that they're heavy cavalry, and also cheap enough to be like a big ranked unit to really be like a shock cavalry unit. So I really like them. Inner Circle Knights for 29 points a model. You get the same weapon skill, you get +1 strength, which is very good. When you factor in lances, they're making you strength 6, so you're wounding toughness 4 opponents on 2s, rather than 3s in your normal knights. You've got initiative 4, which is 1 more than normal knights, which is very useful. Only 1 attack, when a lot of the time on, say, elite knight units you would be seeing 2, but leadership 9 is good. 4+ in the unit again, so the same sort of argument as the normal non-inner circle knights for how big your unit could be. I don't think you're going to go obviously as big as 10, but I do quite like a front rank of 7 in knights. Not too unwieldy, especially with the speed including swift stride. Again, I think stubborn is a bit of a red herring, but you get veteran built in, the drilled built in, obviously first charge, which your normal knights also have. Just that's pretty common throughout all heavy knights in the game. But a really nice unit, and you've got the built-in sort of prayers of Sigmar from the Warrior Priest, where you re-roll any natural to hit rolls of 1 when engaged in combat, which is really nice. How many times can I say nice in a unit entry? You definitely want, I think, the full command on this, whereas in a smaller unit of normal knights, you might only want the champion, so you don't give away the standard when they die. Inner Circle Knights, even from 5+ Inner Circle Knights, I think you want that standard so that you can be adding up combat res and breaking your enemy to get them on the Fabigo loop that you sort of want to get them on as knights, rather than being a more forgettable unit. If you want a forgettable unit that you just throw off into things, normal knights, these are a bit more of an investment, so can't be as throwaway. The full plate that comes built into them, giving you a 2-up save, is a big boost. I do think the actual points difference between normal knights and Inner Circle Knights, I don't think is an obvious choice if you always want Inner Circle, but I think it's a fair increase in points that makes me want to take them both for different jobs, which I think probably the best place for a unit to be in that it's not an auto take over the other one, but also there is a good argument for it. Just skip the stubborn. Just skip the stubborn. Win the combats. Come on. Demigriff Knight for 58 points. You get 1 attack per model. You've got Demigriffs, which then have 3 attacks at strength 5. Your toughness 4 for all the knights. Strength 4 for the knights. So onto Demigriff Knights. These are like the premier knights of the list. You've got 58 points, so you're near as damn it double the points of an Inner Circle Knight. But for 2 wounds worth of Inner Circle Knights, is how I look at it, you get 3 wounds of Demigriff Knights and a total of 4 attacks at AP -2 because the Wicked Claws are the Demigriff. So effectively, you're getting double the number of attacks, an extra wound, and you're actually taking less space, like sort of laterally across the field, than the same amount of attacks in Inner Circle Knights. I do think Demigriffs are in a real good position. I don't think Inner Circle Knights don't have a place, but Demigriffs are incredibly good. I definitely upgrade them with full plate. Me personally, definitely Lances. There's a bit of an argument if you don't count on them just always breaking the enemy to take halberds, but I think you need to really, I think you should only be throwing them into things where you can get a Fabigo loop going, so you always get your lances anyway. I suppose against things with shield wall, that might not happen, but at that point, I think you maybe need to be avoiding that unit and charging it with multiple things rather than just relying on a Demigriff Knight unit to break it. I think they're one of the best things in the army list. So next we have the Empire Steam Tank for 265 points, and I am very split on the Steam Tank. I suppose we'll get into it as we go along. I'm not going to read out all the rules, but basically you're a chariot with strength 6, toughness 7, 10 wounds, so like very strong there. You've got an Empire Engineer Commander with BS 4 and 1 attack, leadership 8, who's got a hand weapon, though can take a Hochland long rifle, pigeon bomb, repeater pistol. You won't count as moving if you use the Hochland long rifle after you've moved, because you're a chariot with a firing platform. Maybe you could just throw in pigeon bombs for shits and gigs on the Steam Tank. But I think the main thing that I'm split on is the fact that he's got a steam cannon and steam gun. So they operate, so the steam cannon is a 24-inch range cannon, which just is a normal cannon. Steam gun, flamer template, strength 2, breath weapon. One of which you want to stay far away with, one of which you want to get close. Using it as a heavy chariot, you can get, yes, you get impact hits, but then if you get ground down into a combat, you've only got stomp attacks D3 plus 1. So on the first round, yes, you can get a lot of hits and a lot of stomp attacks potentially, but you could just roll badly and then just end up in this combat where you're not utilising your cannon for the rest of the game. So I think it's something that is more, rather than a heavy chariot that just can charge off into the enemy, I think it's got to be used with a bit more nuance. I think what you've got to do with the steam tank is utilise the cannon while the enemy's at range, not charge off, and then again, like the War Altar of Sigmar, smash into your opponent from the flanks, and break the combats in the centre where your regimental units might be struggling, and use it in sort of that way to add close order, to add actual killy power to a unit that's already got a lot of static combat res in your favour. It's not like it's a Chaos Chariot, Beastman Chariot, Orc Chariot, which has got a big character on top of it that is just going to be smashing people with all of their attacks relentlessly turn after turn. It relies on impact hits in that one turn like a normal chariot does, but then has a low number of attacks for preceding turns. So that is, I might be wrong. Let me know in the comments if you disagree with my assessment of steam tanks. That I've only used one once in a game, but it's just how I found, like, sort of, when I give these opinions, I like to have tested them out a little bit, and when I'm going to say, oh, I don't like using it in this way, I tend to have played a game where I've tried to use it in that way and come unstuck using it in that way. So it has a little bit of game experience behind it to say don't use it in the charging off role. But if you have found, oh, steam tank, and obviously with a unit of knights, could do really successful in the same way, as I said, a War Altar could do. But if you're charging off, but that's just my thoughts on the steam tank. It is a solid, unbreakable, 10 wounds, toughness 7, terror for your opponent to get rid of, and a good anchor to a battle line is how I sort of think of it these days. Adding terror as well to your opponent for the -1 leadership, for when if you're doubling out +1 your opponent, you're reducing their leadership, so they're much more likely to run away, be that for Vigo or normal, but then you're doubling out +1 because you've got all these state troops, and then you run them down and a success. I think it just ties together a little bit nicely with how a battle line of Empire would be working. So, on to finally the artillery. So the Great Cannon, 125 points, Veteran for 10 points. If you end up taking leadership checks, like panic checks, I definitely think it's been worth that 10 points. They're pretty cheap and at D3 +1 wounds because it's a Great Cannon. I really like the Empire Great Cannons. One usage of cannons that I think it ties in well with the Empire list. One thing I really like with cannons is that on deployment, if you can deploy them on the hill with a unit in front of them, as can be seen on the screen now, they can't be targeted because this unit on the hill blocks line of sight to the cannon. So even if I don't get first turn, enemy bolt throwers, war machines, other shooting units can't target my cannon. Then in the first turn, I can move my unit off the hill, and now my cannon has line of sight. So, and that's just a general artillery trick, right? If this was tried in reverse, so we've got a bolt thrower on hill with a cannon off hill, or on hill at the other side, because of the cannon fire rule, I can target the infantry unit that's on the hill and then smash through the unit into the opposing bolt thrower. So it can protect itself like a normal artillery on a hill by having another unit, but also it can completely negate that for your opponents, which is a big benefit of cannons, I think, in smashing other war machines. So you can get supremacy with a cannon much more easily than you can with other bolt throwers. Now, bolt throwers, say like in Dwarves, have become very like, oh, it's the bolt thrower that you take. I do think there is a good argument for the cannon because of stuff like that and just getting that artillery supremacy. And at 125 points, I think great cannons are cheap enough to do that and be putting out some hurt. Mortars, for 95 points, 105 with veteran crew. Again, I think it's very good. It depends. I don't tend to be facing very many opponents with low toughness and armor value at the moment. That's my current meta. I think we've got like a few dwarves, orcs, ogres, things like that. So I've not had much use out of mortars. But if you're playing against like skeletons, zombies, goblins, things like that, mortars really come into their own for just culling units. So it's not one that I can speak directly on from being really successful. What I can say is being on the receiving end of mortars when I'm playing Empire and someone else is like whatever their race's mortar type is, or stone thrower, is really painful. And for 95 points, I think there's a good shout if you end up playing against players with horde armies. Hellblaster volley guns for 120 points. Compulsory engineer if you're taking a Hellblaster volley gun to get that ballistic skill 4 and re-rolling the artillery dice that you're going to roll 3 of for the Hellblaster volley gun. Now, you've got strength 5, AP -1 with armor bane 2, which is really good. Hellblaster means that you roll 3 artillery dice. If you get 1 misfire, you get -1 to hit. If you get 2 misfires, you roll on the misfire table, like a normal organ gun, say. If you get 3 misfires, all the shots are fired, and then the Hellblaster volley gun, so that's 30, then the Hellblaster volley gun is destroyed. You get an additional -1 to hit modifier, so that means that you would be hitting, unless you're within 12-inch range, you'd be hitting on 6s if you didn't have the engineer, or 5s if you did. Now, the reason I say that is because it doesn't actually have multiple shots. It has the Hellblaster rule. So you don't take -1 for firing multiple shots, which is something that I tripped up on a couple of times when first started like playing with organ guns and Hellblasters. So just watch out for that. You don't take the -1 for multiple shots because you don't have the rule. And I think it's actually a real worthwhile artillery piece in an edition of the game where artillery aren't at their strongest, but getting so many shots at high strength for actually not too many points, I wouldn't say. I think it is definitely worthwhile. I like them. Finally, we've got the Hellstorm rocket batteries for 125 points. Place 3 small blasts with a central hole of each over the unit. Roll your scattering and stuff as per, and any model whose base is under risk being hit by strength 3, AP -1. It's sort of, those blasts obviously can add up to more hits on a unit than a large blast. But they've all got to go pretty perfectly, and for an additional sort of 30-40% over a mortar, and being in the rare category where you may also want a steam tank, a Hellblaster volley gun, I think they're in a far too competitive slot to justify what they're trying to do. I prefer the mortar, though you obviously might have a different opinion on that if you are facing, say, like Bretonians more, where you want that low strength but also AP -1. But I like the mortar over the Hellstorm rocket battery just because of the price and the slot more than any particular thing. And that actually brings us to the Empire army list. Hopefully you've got a bit of a sense of the army list through this. I think it's like 2 hours of this guide. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. So if you enjoyed this guide, don't forget to do all the YouTubey stuff. It lets me know that you want to see more videos like this. And inspires me to do them, especially when it's getting to these sort of lengths of video for me to record and educate myself on these army lists. If you really like it, there is a Patreon link below where you can get yourself access to the Discord, podcast format versions of these guides, as well as dice. And with that, I will catch you next time in a bit.